Sometimes the greatest shifts in fortune don't happen because of big decisions, but because of small, quiet choices we never thought to question. A leaf curling the wrong way, a vine that clings too tightly, a tree whose roots reach not upward, but downward, pulling energy away instead of inviting it to rise. In Feng Shui, the language of plants is subtle but undeniable. They are not just passive decorations. They are active participants in the story your home tells the universe. And what they say about your energy, your future, your prosperity, matters more than most people realize. If the walls of your home could speak, if the soil beneath your feet could whisper, what would they say about the life growing inside your space? Would they describe a story of upward movement, of nourishment, of expansion? Or would they murmur of stagnation, hidden sorrow, or fortune slipping quietly away? Today, I want to take you into a world that many overlook, a world where the plants you nurture either protect your prosperity or quietly unravel it. Not through superstition, not through fear, but through the real, living relationships between growth, energy, and intention. In this video, we'll uncover 7 specific types of plants that Feng Shui masters, those who understand the ancient architecture of unseen forces, advise you to avoid if you want your home to truly nourish your future. Some are surprisingly common. Some are beloved for their beauty, but hidden beneath that beauty is a pattern of energy that weakens rather than strengthens. This isn't about being afraid of nature. It's about choosing with consciousness, about aligning the spirit of your home with the life you are trying to build, not the patterns you are trying to escape. Because fortune, true fortune, the kind that sustains health, relationships, wealth, and inner peace, doesn't fall from the sky. It's not random. It listens. It observes the spaces we live in, the rituals we maintain, the energy we allow or reject. It flows where it is respected and nourished. It withers where it is ignored. Before we journey deeper, if this kind of wisdom resonates with you, I warmly invite you to support this path. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need a fresh lens on their living space, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Every small action you take helps us grow closer to our first 1,000 followers, and every step allows us to bring grounded, ancient knowledge into the modern spaces where it's needed most. Because your home is not just a shelter, it's not just a structure, it's an energetic partner. And today we'll learn how to honor it more deeply by seeing what has been quietly asking for change all along. Let's begin this journey, not to criticize what has been, but to choose with greater wisdom what will be. The deeper reason plants matter in Feng Shui. In Feng Shui, every object within a living space holds a vibration, and plants, because they are living organisms, carry some of the strongest energetic signatures of all. Their influence is not passive. It weaves into the atmosphere of your home day after day, season after season, until the energy they cultivate either becomes a ladder pulling you upward or a weight subtly dragging you down. Plants anchor qi. That simple fact has been known for centuries across cultures that understood how to live in harmony with nature. But what is often overlooked is that the wrong kind of plant, chosen without awareness, does not just fail to nourish a space, it actively anchors forms of energy that breed decay, confusion, or stagnation. When a plant is vibrant, balanced, and growth-oriented, it sends out signals of renewal, optimism, health, and opportunity. It strengthens the yang qualities of a home: warmth, motivation, circulation, movement. It also balances the yin qualities: rest, reflection, inner peace. But when a plant embodies instability, when it droops, chokes, invades, or feels weighed down, the energy it broadcasts mirrors those same qualities invisibly into your life. Slowly, perhaps imperceptibly at first, fortune begins to miss its mark. Relationships encounter friction that seems to arise out of nowhere. Financial opportunities get delayed or misdirected. Personal health or vitality may feel sapped without an obvious cause. This happens because in Feng Shui, symbolism, physical structure, and energetic pattern are never separate. They are aspects of the same living reality. A climbing vine that wraps itself tightly around a wall may seem beautiful, even romantic to the untrained eye. but symbolically it sends a message of entanglement, suffocation, restriction. It says to the universe, here, energy must struggle to move forward. Here, things cling and constrict rather than flow freely. Over time, your own efforts may start to mirror that hidden story, feeling stuck, trapped, or endlessly tangled in small problems. Similarly, a tree with exposed roots or a twisted, barren shape projects the story of instability and hidden weakness. Even if the leaves are green, the energetic signature is one of loss and vulnerability. Beyond symbolism, the very growth pattern of a plant matters. Plants that grow chaotically without clear form, that spread aggressively or droop in exhaustion, imprint their chaotic rhythm into the emotional body of the home. They become energetic background noise, subtly increasing feelings of overwhelm, restlessness, or disconnection. Conversely, plants that grow upright with structure and vitalities offer a template for upward movement, strength, and grounded creativity. They set a tone of healthy expansion, not just for the physical environment, but for the people living inside it. And it's not just the visible form of the plant that speaks. Every plant, every leaf, every root system emits an energetic field, what modern science might call a biofield, and what ancient wisdom simply recognized as chi. Some fields are coherent, vibrant, and life-enhancing. Others are dissonant, weakened, or conflicting with human needs for emotional security, financial stability, and spiritual clarity. This is why two homes with equally lush gardens can feel so different. One feels like walking into a sanctuary. The other feels subtly heavy, confusing, or restless without any obvious explanation. In traditional Feng Shui, masters observe these patterns not as rigid rules, but as living relationships between humans and nature. They noticed that when homes were surrounded by plants with too much chaotic growth, or by plants tied to decay, grief, or heaviness in cultural symbolism, the people inside those homes tended to experience more conflict, illness, or misfortune. Not because the plants cursed them, but because the energy field became skewed toward disharmony, and humans, always sensitive to their environment, whether consciously or not, began to resonate with that imbalance. This understanding does not come from superstition. It comes from paying attention. It comes from recognizing that everything we surround ourselves with either nourishes our life force or demands energy from it. That every seed planted, every corner decorated, every atmosphere maintained is a conversation between us and the unseen but deeply felt currents that shape our lives. Choosing plants, therefore, is not just about beauty, ease of care, or tradition. It is about asking, what am I inviting into the ground of my fortune? What subtle stories am I reinforcing around me every day? Am I building an environment where prosperity, health, and harmony can thrive without obstruction? Or am I inadvertently creating a space where those energies get tangled, compressed, or drained? Fortunately, awareness itself begins to shift. You do not need to be a Feng Shui expert to feel when something is off. Often you already know intuitively. A room feels heavier than it should. A certain corner feels sleepy or tense. A garden once full of life now feels stagnant. These sensations are not accidents. They are reflections of the energetic conversations happening between your spirit and your surroundings. The first step is to trust that perception. The second step is to align your choices with it. When selecting plants for your home, choose those whose forms uplift, whose presence feels fresh, vital, quietly joyful. Choose plants that symbolize resilience, abundance, adaptability, longevity. And just as importantly, be willing to part ways with plants that, however beautiful they may appear, carry the wrong energetic story for the life you are building now. In the next sections, we will explore specific plants that Feng Shui wisdom advises us to be cautious about. Not because they are bad, but because their natural signatures may not align with the fields of growth, peace, and fortune you wish to cultivate. Remember, energy is always moving. The question is, where will you direct it? Toward expansion or contraction? Toward flourishing or fading? The 7 energy blocking. 1. Climbing vines, entanglement, and stagnation. Climbing vines, while often celebrated for their romantic, overgrown beauty, are one of the most quietly destructive forces when it comes to maintaining healthy energy flow in a home. In Feng Shui, vines represent more than just botanical growth. They symbolize entanglement, restriction, and the slow suffocation of dynamic qi. When vines cling to walls, fences, or even spread indoors, they create an energetic metaphor of constraint, where life force is no longer able to circulate freely and becomes trapped within invisible knots of stagnation. The physical nature of vines mirrors this perfectly. They do not grow with independence or upright dignity. They depend on attaching themselves to other structures, often overwhelming them, slowly wrapping around until the original form disappears under a web of tangled greenery. Symbolically, this is the antithesis of what we seek in a healthy, thriving space. In Feng Shui, spaces should encourage upward movement, clear flow, and independent strength. Vines suppress these qualities by binding, twisting, and smothering. This silent oppression of energy eventually mirrors itself into the lives of the inhabitants, creating patterns of feeling stuck, emotionally tangled, or burdened by situations that seem to tighten rather than open with time. Homeowners who allow climbing plants to dominate their architecture or even their indoor decor often report feelings of being stuck without understanding why. Projects stall, opportunities seem elusive. Financial or personal growth begins to feel like moving through thick, clinging fog. Even interpersonal relationships may feel increasingly entangled, with unclear boundaries and unresolved tension accumulating subtly over time. It's not that vines are inherently malicious. Nature has no ill will, but their energy pattern does not support the kind of clean, self-sustaining momentum that prosperity requires. One case I remember vividly involved a client who owned a charming home near the edge of a forest. She loved the wild look of ivy climbing up her porch columns and across parts of her brickwork. To visitors, it looked picturesque, almost storybook-like, but inside the home, she felt increasingly claustrophobic. Her business had plateaued, and despite her relentless efforts, new contracts and opportunities simply would not materialize. Her marketing campaign stalled. Collaborations fizzled without explanation. During a consultation, we focused not just on her interior layout, but also the exterior message her home was broadcasting. It became clear that the heavy ivy was not just an aesthetic choice, it was an energetic chokehold. Within 2 weeks of carefully clearing the vines, freeing the architecture to breathe again, and allowing sunlight and air to re-engage with the house's surfaces, she reported a sudden surge in energy. Not only did her mood shift, but within 2 months, her business saw a revival. 3 new projects came through, including one from a client she had given up hope on months earlier. To her, it felt miraculous. But to anyone versed in the energetics of space, it was simply the natural result of removing a silent saboteur. In practical Feng Shui, if climbing plants are cherished for their beauty, they must be rigorously maintained. They should not obscure doors, windows, or main walls. They should not be allowed to wrap uncontrollably around foundational structures. Better yet, if possible, climbing plants should be relocated to trellises away from the house, where their energy can be contained and appreciated without tangling with the home's protective qi. Inside the home, the same caution applies. Hanging or trailing plants should not be allowed to sprawl downward in main energy areas like the living room, entrance hall, or workspace. Indoor vines that dangle heavily can pull down the subtle vibration of these spaces, encouraging lethargy, procrastination, or an unconscious resistance to progress. If you must use trailing plants indoors, keep them well trimmed, positioned higher up where their growth gestures upward rather than downward, and balanced by more structured plants that reinforce upright, clear forms. Symbolically, everything in your environment is teaching your subconscious mind how to move through the world. Vines teach entanglement. They teach the energy of clinging, of dependency, of uncontrolled sprawl. This is not the message you want your fortune to receive. This is not the story you want your ambitions to be wrapped in. In contrast, plants that grow upright with clear trunks and defined leaves teach strength, clarity, and forward momentum. Qualities essential for building not just material wealth, but a meaningful, resilient life. Thus, the principle is simple but profound. If you want to thrive, your home must breathe freely. It must reflect openness, support upward movement, and encourage quality to circulate without obstruction or confusion. And it starts with something as humble and overlooked as a vine curling quietly in a corner or along a porch. Notice what is climbing over you unseen. Notice what is binding the energy of your spaces without your permission. And with simple, loving clarity, choose to free yourself and your home for better, brighter stories to take root. 2. Shrub verbena, hidden disorder. Among the many plants that quietly misalign the energy of a home, shrub verbena is one of the most deceptively charming. At first glance, its vibrant clusters of tiny flowers and its hardy, spreading nature seem like qualities to be admired. It thrives with little attention, survives in difficult conditions, and offers bursts of color across different seasons. Yet in Feng Shui, what a plant survives through and how it behaves once established reveals its deeper, energetic signature. Shrub verbena, though bright in bloom, carries a message of hidden disorder, unchecked sprawl, and emotional disarray that can seep quietly into the spaces and lives it inhabits. Shrub verbena is invasive by nature. Given even minimal opportunity, it expands aggressively, crowding out other plants, destabilizing soil, and creating tangled undergrowth that is difficult to control without constant intervention. In an energetic sense, this pattern mirrors the way hidden clutter, scattered thoughts, or unresolved personal tensions can accumulate beneath the surface of an otherwise beautiful life. Everything looks fine from a distance, colorful, lively, full of potential. But closer inspection reveals layers of congestion, spaces fighting for oxygen, systems overwhelmed by unchecked expansion. In the home, when shrub verbena dominates the outdoor landscape or is even symbolically present near entryways, gardens, or patios, it programs the key of the space to reflect that same subtle battle between appearances and underlying chaos. Feng Shui emphasizes not just the visible form of a plant, but its behavior, its underlying energy pattern. Plants that grow in clean, clear structures support clean, clear flow of energy in a home. Plants that grow haphazardly, sprawling in every direction without discernment or balance, project confusion into the chi field. Over time, this influence shows itself in the lives of those who dwell nearby. Mental overwhelm without clear cause. Projects started but left unfinished. Financial flow that seems vibrant one moment and unpredictable the next. Relationships where communication gets tangled even with good intentions. For those who admire the resilience of shrub verbena or are reluctant to remove it, moderation and control are key. Trimming it regularly to keep it compact, pairing it with more structured companion plants, or moving it away from primary key areas like the front door, main walkways, or patios can mitigate its more disruptive influence. However, the simplest and most energetically aligned choice is often to favor plants that embody natural order, graceful expansion, and balanced vibrancy. Choosing plants such as dwarf citrus trees, flowering camellias, or bamboo palms allows the home to absorb patterns of growth that are organized, uplifting, and resilient without tipping into chaotic sprawl. These plants anchor stability and direction, rather than signaling to the universe that life inside the home is a scramble of unmanaged energy. Remember, Feng Shui teaches that your surroundings are not neutral backdrops. They are living extensions of your intention, your unconscious patterns, your hidden hopes. Every leaf, every root, every unseen expansion beneath the soil carries a message that the walls of your home, the air in your rooms, and the energy around your body are constantly listening to. To live with true clarity, begin by honoring that message. Choose plants that reflect the life you want to grow into, focused, abundant, resilient. Not just plants that look pretty on the surface but sow confusion underneath. Your space deserves that quiet integrity, and so do you. 3. Banyan tree, spiritual gloom. Among all the plants revered for their ancient beauty, the banyan tree holds a particularly complex place within Feng Shui. With its thick roots, expansive canopy, and haunting, majestic presence, the banyan is a marvel of survival and endurance. Yet precisely because of its immense energetic weight, it carries qualities that are deeply yin, meaning it draws energy inward, compresses it, and grounds it to such an extent that it often suffocates movement, growth, and lightness within a domestic space. In the context of a home, especially smaller homes or apartments, this heavy yin signature becomes a quiet but powerful source of spiritual and emotional heaviness that can ripple through the lives of those who live nearby. Banyan trees are often associated with ancestral energy, graveyards, temples, and places of mourning or deep contemplation in many traditional Asian cultures. They are trees of memory, of holding on to the past, of binding energy into dense roots that resist forward motion. In sacred contexts, this makes them guardians, silent witnesses to the movement of generations. But in the everyday context of a modern living space, especially one striving for prosperity, joy, and vibrant growth, the banyan's energy is simply too weighted. It calls qi downward into stillness, into reflection that sometimes borders on melancholy, into unseen entanglements that can feel as if invisible anchors are attached to the heart of the home. One memorable consultation I recall involved a family who had, out of admiration for Eastern art and symbolism, placed a large banyan bonsai in their living room. It was a stunning piece, beautifully shaped, ancient in feeling, carefully tended. Yet over the course of several years, subtle shifts had taken place within the family dynamics. Their moods had grown heavier. Conversations, once lively, became tinged with unspoken tension. Small illnesses seemed to linger longer than expected. Motivation, especially in the teenage children, quietly eroded. There was no obvious external cause. It was a malaise too subtle to name, but too real to ignore. After a full energy assessment of the space, the banyan bonsai was identified as a potential anchor of this hidden heaviness. It wasn't a matter of superstition, it was a matter of resonance. The family decided, respectfully and without resentment, to relocate the banyan to an outdoor meditation space in their backyard, still honoring its beauty and significance, but freeing the interior of its overwhelming energetic weight. Within weeks, the atmosphere inside their home began to lift. Conversations returned to ease. A sense of forward movement, small but perceptible, reawakened. Even the overall health patterns in the household improved with fewer lingering illnesses and more natural vitality among all members. In Feng Shui, this kind of shift is neither surprising nor mysterious. Heavy yin objects, when placed improperly, create an invisible drag on the movement of qi. Over time, this drag doesn't just remain theoretical, it translates into emotional, relational, and financial inertia. The home no longer breathes easily. The people inside no longer dream as freely. Thus, the guidance regarding banyan trees is not to vilify them, but to understand and respect their power. Large banyan trees should belong outdoors, anchoring parks, temple grounds, or meditation spaces where their energies are appropriate and even necessary. In homes, especially compact ones or spaces where families are growing, dreaming, building, and transforming, it is far wiser to choose plants that echo those intentions: flexibility, upward growth, vitality, movement toward light. If you already have a banyan bonsai or tree indoors, reflect carefully on the energy it projects. Notice if there are areas in your life that feel heavier than they should be, goals that seem stalled without clear reason, emotional undercurrents that persistently pull downward. Sometimes the solution is not effort or therapy or new strategies. Sometimes it is simply allowing the space itself to breathe again, to release what was never meant to be held so closely indoors. Your home is your sanctuary. Every object within it must be chosen not just with your eyes, but with your spirit. Let the forces you invite in support your ascent, not bind you quietly to unseen roots you cannot see, but surely feel. 4. Cypress trees, cemetery vibration. Cypress trees, with their tall, slender trunks and somber green spires, have long been associated with places of mourning, remembrance, and finality. Their symbolism is ancient, stretching across many cultures from east to west, where they are revered for their beauty, but also quietly recognized as markers of solemn spaces, cemeteries, memorial gardens, and sacred grounds where the living come to honor the dead. In Feng Shui, the energetic imprint of the cypress is powerful but heavy. It represents sharp, solemn qi, Energy that, while dignified, is ultimately too still, too serious, too rooted in endings rather than beginnings. For homes striving to cultivate prosperity, joy, movement, and dynamic life force, the dominant presence of cypress trees can create subtle but persistent obstacles. The chi that radiates from a cypress is not necessarily betamern in a moral sense. It is reverent, stable, deeply grounding. But grounding energy, when taken too far, becomes suppression. The kind of stillness that a cemetery needs for reflection and peace is not the same kind of energy that a home needs to foster thriving relationships, growing businesses, or expanding opportunities. In the language of Feng Shui, what a cypress tree broadcasts is a call toward introspection, closure, and containment. Energetic states that are fundamentally at odds with the principles of vitality, wealth circulation, and relational openness that a living home requires. I recall working with a middle-aged couple who had unknowingly bought a property flanked by several mature cypress trees along its rear boundary. They appreciated the privacy the trees provided, the stately outline they cast against the sky. Yet over the first year of living there, they found themselves withdrawing socially, losing momentum in both career and personal pursuits. Their home began to feel increasingly isolated, not just physically but emotionally. Friends visited less often. Projects that once excited them now felt burdensome. Small health issues, nothing catastrophic, lingered longer than expected. It wasn't until a Feng Shui consultation highlighted the role of the cypress vibration that they began to connect the dots. The solution was not radical. They didn't have to remove the trees. Instead, they softened the energetic imprint, planting flowering shrubs with expansive, joyful ki around the cypress bases, adding garden lighting to warm the evenings, introducing wind chimes to stir stagnant energy with sound. Slowly, the emotional landscape of the home lifted, laughter returned, invitations picked up. Their home felt open to life again, rather than silently guarding against it. In practical terms, if your property includes cypress trees and removing them is either impossible or undesirable, the key is mitigation. Layer the surrounding space with plants that encourage movement, color, and softness. Bougainvillea, jasmine, or even sun-loving grasses can help dissolve the sharp solemnity of cypress chi. Wind chimes, flowing water features, or intentional paths that weave gently around the trees rather than ending abruptly at them can all help reintroduce dynamic flow. Indoors, balance the weight by ensuring your spaces remain vibrant. Incorporate round shapes, bright lighting, uplifting art, and lively conversation areas that counteract any creeping heaviness. The principle here is simple yet profound. Every plant, every structure, every energetic presence on your property participates in the ongoing conversation between you and life itself. Cypress trees speak of endings. They call for reflection, restraint, stillness. These are beautiful qualities when sought consciously. But if they dominate the environment unconsciously, they become walls instead of windows. They compress rather than expand. They whisper of conclusions when you are still meant to be growing. Honor the cypress if it stands near you, but do not let it narrate your story. Your home should echo beginnings, not endings. Movement, not silence. Not just memory. Life is a river, and while stones must exist along the riverbed, they must not dam the flow entirely. Choose to soften, to invite, to breathe around whatever feels too heavy. In doing so, you reclaim the sovereignty of your home's story and allow the river of fortune to flow freely once again. 5. Coral tree, loneliness and stagnation. The coral tree, despite its striking beauty with vivid red blooms and sculptural form, carries an energetic blueprint that is far less supportive of abundance and connection than many realize. In the lens of Feng Shui, every plant is not judged solely by its physical beauty, but by the emotional and energetic message it carries into a space. The coral tree, with its sharp, almost defiant structure and sparse foliage, sends a message of aloofness, emotional distance, and stagnation. It represents the kind of beauty that stands apart from community, the kind of presence that does not invite collaboration or expansion, but instead silently encourages separation and stillness. While it can be magnificent in a landscape when placed carefully, Its energy is fundamentally isolating. Unlike trees that invite gathering, like the oak with its wide, sheltering canopy, or the fruit tree that nurtures and feeds, the coral tree tends to create spaces beneath it that are barren, uninviting, and energetically cold. Its very architecture seems to say, keep your distance. In Feng Shui, such an energetic imprint matters deeply. The chi field around a home or workplace mirrors the subtle language of its surroundings. When the dominant plant life expresses isolation, that vibration will quietly echo into the relationships, opportunities, and financial flows of those living nearby. Prosperity, in energetic terms, is not only a matter of personal effort. It depends on connection, openness, circulation. Isolation, even beautiful isolation, is antithetical to abundance. In practical observation, homes or properties heavily dominated by coral trees often experience subtle but persistent patterns. Social invitations thin out, networks grow weaker, collaborations fizzle before they bear fruit. Financially, periods of active growth give way to inexplicable slowdowns, as if momentum itself is unwilling to approach too closely. It's not because the coral tree actively curses the space. Rather, its energetic signature acts like a repellent mist, subtly signaling to both people and opportunities that this is a place to admire from afar, not a place to engage, nurture, or invest. Because of this, Feng Shui recommendations around coral trees are clear and consistent. If they are already present and cannot be removed, it is crucial to soften their influence. Surround them with ground cover plants that encourage warmth and invitation, such as jasmine, rosemary, or flowering shrubs that radiate outward rather than retract inward. Emphasize curved garden paths, abundant seating areas, or water features nearby to counteract the stark isolation the coral tree tends to project. Indoors, the emotional aloofness associated with the coral trees can be energetically balanced by introducing round shapes, soft textures, and warm colors in communal areas to reinforce belonging and intimacy. The principle is simple. Your external environment is never passive. Every structure, every plant, every visual element around you either supports the architecture of abundance or it subtly undermines it. The coral tree, for all its dramatic splendor, belongs to the architecture of solitude. Beautiful, yes. Impressive, certainly. But life and fortune favor spaces where openness, flow, and heartfelt connection are cultivated with conscious care. In the end, beauty alone is never enough. The question to ask is, does this beauty draw life closer or hold it at arm's length? In Feng Shui, the answer to that question often makes all the difference between a home that flourishes and one that quietly recedes from the flow of fortune. 6. Poinsettia, fire that burns stability. The poinsettia, with its vivid red leaves and striking presence, is often associated with celebration, abundance, and festive cheer. Yet in the deeper wisdom of Feng Shui, what at first seems purely auspicious can, if placed carelessly, tip the delicate balance of energy inside a home or workspace. Red in Feng Shui represents the element of fire. It is dynamic, vibrant, powerful, but like real fire, it must be handled with awareness and respect. The poinsettia, especially when placed too prominently or in overly yang spaces, can accelerate energetic intensity beyond healthy thresholds, creating environments where competition, agitation, and emotional burnout silently take root. The principle at work is subtle but powerful. Feng Shui teaches that energy must circulate smoothly, not explode. Fire energy, when well placed and moderated, fuels passion, motivation, invisibility. It sparks ideas, encourages confidence, and supports social warmth. But when fire overwhelms, it creates quarrels, irritability, impulsive decisions, and ultimately the erosion of both relationships and stability. The poinsettia, with its aggressive red hue and sharp leaf shapes, becomes a magnifier of this unstable fire energy if introduced without proper balance. One vivid example of this came from a consultation with a young startup founder who had adorned his newly rented office space with several poinsettias around the holidays, believing them to be symbols of prosperity and good luck. Initially, the office felt energetic and driven, ideas flowed, meetings were dynamic. But within a few short months, that initial spark turned volatile. Arguments among team members became frequent. Decision-making fractured along personal lines. The once promising unity of the group began to disintegrate into competitiveness and distrust. He reached out for advice, and upon reviewing the energetic setup of his office, it became immediately clear. The space was flooded with uncontrolled fire energy. It wasn't just the poinsettias, but they were amplifying an already unbalanced configuration. The solution was straightforward. The poinsettias were moved out, replaced with softer toned plants like peace lilies and bamboo palms, and warm lighting was softened. Within weeks, the office atmosphere recalibrated. Communication improved, collaboration was reborn, and the overall tension dissipated like smoke clearing after a firestorm. The lesson is profound yet elegantly simple. The symbolism you invite into your space must match the outcome you seek. Poinsettias, while beautiful, are best treated as brief seasonal accents, not as long-term energetic anchors. If used, they should be balanced with water elements, such as fountains or blue tones, or placed in transition zones like entryways, rather than main living or working spaces where their intensity would otherwise saturate daily life. In residential settings, poinsettias should be handled even more delicately. Placing them in bedrooms, for instance, can severely disrupt restful yin energy, leading to poor sleep, increased restlessness, or heightened tension between partners. Even in living rooms, where more yang energy is acceptable, they should be displayed in moderation and not positioned directly opposite major seating areas, where conversation and relaxation are meant to be nourished. The deeper principle behind the poinsettia's cautionary tale is this: fire is a blessing when contained, but a destroyer when unchecked. Beauty is not enough if it comes with imbalance. In your home and in your life, every visual choice is an invitation, an agreement between you and the unseen forces that shape your days. Choosing what you place in your environment is an act of profound intention. It is not just about aesthetics. It is about the life you are designing quietly through thousands of small, unseen decisions that accumulate into destiny. Let your choices, especially those as vivid as a poinsettia, be aligned with stability, peace, and enduring vitality, not just short-lived bursts of excitement that leave ashes in their wake. 7. Golden trumpet, alamanda. False fortune. The golden trumpet, with its vibrant yellow blossoms and cheerful appearance, often tempts homeowners and landscapers alike into believing it is a symbol of flourishing abundance. After all, yellow is traditionally associated with wealth, brightness, and optimism in many cultural traditions. However, in the deeper understanding of Feng Shui, what matters is not merely surface symbolism, but the energetic behavior a plant embodies over time. The golden trumpet, for all its outward splendor, carries a hidden signature of instability, an energy that shouts of fortune on the outside while quietly harboring decay within its structure. It becomes, therefore, a dangerous symbol of false fortune, alluring to the eyes but subtly corroding the very stability true prosperity requires. In its growth pattern, the golden trumpet reveals its hidden nature. It tends to spread aggressively if left unchecked, often invading surrounding spaces, overreaching its boundaries without proper grounding. Its internal stems, though flexible, are surprisingly weak, prone to damage from even moderate winds or stress. Beneath the glossy surface of those brilliant yellow flowers, there lies a structural frailty, a message that echoes into the homes that allow it too close. In Feng Shui, such characteristics mirror fortune that looks impressive temporarily, but collapses when tested. Rapid financial gains followed by sudden losses. Relationships that sparkle brightly at first, but unravel under pressure. Opportunities that promise more than they deliver. This dynamic is not rare to observe. I once consulted for a family who had placed golden trumpet vines along their front entry, drawn to the vibrant, sunlit energy it seemed to radiate. Within the year, they experienced a meteoric rise in their small business. New clients, unexpected media attention, an expanding network. Yet equally quickly, cracks began to appear. Contracts fell through at the last moment. Promises of partnership dissolved. Internally, the stress began affecting family relationships. When they looked deeper, they realized they had built their recent success on unstable foundations. Overextension, fragile agreements, unclear roles. As we restructured their space and their strategic focus, removing the golden trumpet from their entrance and replacing it with sturdier, deeply rooted plants such as camellias and peonies, the energy of their business life recalibrated. Growth slowed, but it stabilized, and from that stability, real prosperity began to mature. The caution here is not against beauty. Beauty is essential. The caution is against mistaking surface brilliance for true vitality. In Feng Shui, lasting abundance arises from strength beneath the surface. Structures, relationships, intentions, and spaces that can endure the inevitable shifts in storms of life. A home that surrounds itself with unstable energies, no matter how beautiful at first glance, invites instability into every corner of its fortune. If golden trumpet plants are already part of your environment, consider replacing them with species that embody longevity, resilience, and gentle expansion. Peonies, citrus trees, plum blossoms, these are plants whose cycles of growth mirror steady, prosperous living. If removal is not immediately possible, energetically buffer the presence of golden trumpet with elements that ground and strengthen. Stone features, earth-tone pots, or deeply rooted companions that can absorb and neutralize some of the plant's unstable signature. Ultimately, Feng Shui invites us not just to decorate, but to discern, to look beyond appearances, to listen to what the energy behind a form is actually whispering into the life of the home. The golden trumpet may shout of fortune at first glance, but it does not sing a song that endures. Choose the beauty that carries depth. Choose the fortune that holds its shape beyond the first bright bloom. What to grow instead? Plants that anchor prosperity. After understanding which plants quietly erode fortune, it becomes just as vital to know which companions can silently cultivate prosperity, stability, and connection. In Feng Shui, the right plants act not merely as decor, but as living vessels of intentional energy. They anchor specific qualities into your home's energetic field, helping to weave fortune into the fabric of your daily life. Thoughtful placement and genuine appreciation transform these plants from background scenery into silent allies supporting your growth. Among the many options available, 4 plants stand out as particularly aligned with fortune-enhancing energy when selected and positioned with care. The white bird of paradise is often misunderstood as purely ornamental, admired for its exotic form and broad, soaring leaves. But its deeper energetic meaning in Feng Shui is rooted in freedom and resilience. Its leaves stretch upward and outward as if reaching for possibility, embodying the expansive spirit needed for financial and personal growth. It encourages bold vision, tempered with grounded presence. Ideally, the white bird of paradise should be placed in home offices, creative studios, or the southeast area of your home, the sector associated with wealth and abundance. In small spaces, it can energize a lonely corner, transforming it into a point of active aspiration. Its upright form reinforces clarity of purpose and courage, attributes critical for anyone building new ventures or navigating transformative life paths. The bottle palm, with its unique swollen trunk and lush protective canopy, offers a different but equally powerful contribution. In Feng Shui, its form symbolizes storage and safeguarding, like a natural vault for accumulating and preserving wealth. The rounded, grounded trunk acts as a stabilizer, preventing the leakage of fortune while creating a protective embrace around your household's resources. For optimal effect, place the bottle palm near the main entrance, but within the interior line of the house, so it symbolically catches and holds incoming prosperity. In businesses or home-based enterprises, placing one near a cash register, safe, or accounting area can subtly reinforce a healthy flow of income retention and financial responsibility. The dwarf areca palm, light and graceful, brings a different gift: the constant circulation of life force and well-being. Its soft fronds sway gently even with the slightest breeze, reminding the space, and everyone within it, that vitality depends on movement, flexibility, and gentle expansion. Unlike heavier plants that anchor energy into stillness, the areca palm keeps qi lively yet harmonious, promoting health, interpersonal ease, and emotional uplift. Because it belongs to the wood element but carries a softer signature than most upright plants, It is ideal for bedrooms, shared family spaces, or any area where stagnation threatens to set in. Place it where natural light can touch its leaves, allowing it to breathe its healing message fully into the room. Finally, the Schefflera, often called the umbrella plant, is a symbol of family unity and financial luck. Its layered, rounded leaves resemble open palms catching blessings, while its natural growth pattern promotes steady, consistent expansion without aggression. In Feng Shui, the Schefflera strengthens the bonds of communal fortune. It's not just about individual wealth, but collective well-being. A healthy Schefflera placed in the east, health sector, or southeast, wealth sector of a home supports both physical vitality and cooperative prosperity, reminding everyone under its canopy that abundance grows best when shared. It is especially beneficial near dining rooms, family living areas, or wherever conversations, planning, and collaboration tend to happen. Each of these plants, when chosen with intention, becomes more than a decorative piece. They become silent partners in your journey toward greater stability, health, and wealth. And more importantly, they encourage you to live aligned with nature's deepest principles, to rise and expand when called, to conserve and protect when needed, to move flexibly through life's changing winds, and to always remember that true fortune is rooted not just in what you possess, but in the energy you cultivate and the connections you nourish. Choosing plants for prosperity is not about superstition or trend. It is an act of quiet stewardship, a decision to let your space become a mirror of the life you are consciously building. When you walk through your home and see the strong yet graceful white bird, the protective bottle palm, the lively areca, and the embracing Schefflera, you are not just admiring plants, you are witnessing a living agreement between you and the energy of abundance. You are saying without words that you are ready to receive, ready to nurture, and ready to prosper with wisdom, patience, and joy. Somewhere along the way, modern life convinced many of us that plants are just decorations, random choices made for color, for trend, for texture. But ancient wisdom has never forgotten what Feng Shui quietly teaches. Plants are not random. They are silent architects of your fortune, your vitality, and your future. Every root that grows in your home sends tendrils into your destiny. Every leaf that rises or falls mirrors the invisible story your life is telling. Today, you've walked with me through the unseen layers of energy that different plants bring into your space. Some carry the weight of stagnation, conflict, or false promises. Others breathe life into new beginnings, family unity, and lasting abundance. The lesson is not about fear. It is not about throwing everything away. It is about waking up to choice. It is about realizing that the energy flowing through your home, day after day, is not accidental. You have the power and the quiet responsibility to shape it. And the beautiful truth is, you don't need to change everything at once. Sometimes one small, conscious shift is enough to start changing everything else. Maybe it's removing a plant that's been silently weighing your space down. Maybe it's introducing a new one whose energy feels strong, nurturing, and aligned with the life you are ready to create. Maybe it's simply walking through your home with new eyes, asking gently, is this what I want to be breathing in every day? Because your home is not just shelter. It is a living, listening field of possibility. It holds your dreams, your fears, your prayers, your ambitions. It responds to every small signal you give it. And when you choose, even quietly, to align that field with symbols of resilience, flow, and prosperity, you are choosing without speaking a word to honor your future self. So today I invite you, begin with just one choice. Replace one plant that no longer serves you. Welcome in one that does. Not because you expect magic overnight, but because you are willing to meet your life halfway, to breathe a little more courage into your space, to plant a little more fortune into your days. If this video inspired you, I would be deeply honored if you would share it with someone else who is ready to redesign not just their home, but their energy. Leave a comment below. I would love to hear which plant you're choosing to replace or to bring into your space. Your reflections inspire more than you know. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. We are very close to reaching 1,000 followers, and every bit of support helps us bring more grounded, transformative Feng Shui wisdom into homes that are ready to listen, and ready to flourish. Remember, prosperity is not just outside of you. It's already waiting inside your home, waiting for you to invite it in.